Welcome to the Recover You podcast. I'm Kylene.
And I'm Patrick.
We are a couple in recovery
from sex addiction
and betrayal trauma. Together, we share our story to encourage you on your journey. It's here that we talk about sex addiction, betrayal trauma, mental, emotional, and physical health, faith, and anything and everything needed to recover you to your most authentic self that God created you to be.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Recover You podcast, episode 3 of season 2025.
Episode 3 of season 3 in the year 2025. Yes, there you go.
Yeah, that's a little complicated.
You know, if you change the inflection slightly, it'd be like my mom's voicemail. Hello, this is Recover You. We're here recording now, so please listen to the episode.
Please leave a review.
There you go. Yeah. She says, please leave a message. So
yep. Yeah.
She's had that recording for like our home phone for like decades now. So like the inflection, that's the way she says, hello, this is a Griffiths. We can't come to the phone right now.
Completely memorized.
Totally every little bit of it.
Yeah, that happens. It's like a commercial.
Yeah.
So today we're going to talk about the fruits of the Spirit. And so really what we're going to hope to impart, in the episode today is what that means and how it governs reactions and how it governs awareness and how it can further push you down the road to recovery as you kind of move through and evaluate your own reactions and your own behavior. And so, before we get into the detail, that I think the one thing I always want to say is don't go around wielding the fruits of the Spirit, bashing people in for their reactions. This is self-focused. This is a self-focused exercise.
Yeah, I think if somebody did that, it would defeat the whole purpose. Yeah,
I think so too. Yeah. I used to push Jocko's Extreme Ownership book quite a bit at work when I was training leaders, and it's still in there. But it was a really good book, and I remember certain people would kind of yield it like a baton, like, you're not taking ownership, and they'd be like beating people up. I'm like, no, it's really about your own behavior, and stuff like that. But that's what this is, very self-focused today, which is what we really want to do in recovery. We want to spend a lot of our time thinking about our own reactions, right? And that's not just the addict. That's not just the recovering addict, because your reactions indicate the work that's ahead of you, or what you need to maybe double down on, or where you maybe need to go get a resource. If you're having a hard time, being kind towards somebody, why is that? If you're having a hard time approaching a season of joy with joyfulness, why is that? And so that's what this is really about. Is it's kind of like a mission statement in a way on how we should behave as we move through life. And there are distinct reasons. It doesn't mean we get it right, and we're not perfect, and we never will be. But it's just a good barometer for us to evaluate our current, previous, and future actions.
Yeah, and I'll say, so obviously this, if you're familiar with the fruits of the Spirit, you know that this is from the Bible. And if you are not a Christian that listens, we appreciate you so much. And we just want to let you know that this episode will have a little bit more faith content, because that's where the fruits of the Spirit come from. And our faith really impacts sort of how we look at this. So I just kind of want to preface this episode with that. And we hope that you'll stay and join us and get some benefit from it. I will say I was kind of, we were kind of planning and prepping this episode, and I was like, oh, this is going to be really great. And Patrick sort of introduced the concept last week and has really been ruminating is not the right word, marinating with the concept this week. And then we were getting everything prepped. And then I had an afternoon. One of the fruits of the Spirit is patience. And I had an afternoon where all of my patience limits were tested.
You bundled up all the fruits of the Spirit and tied string around and burned them in a fire.
I said, that's stupid. I was working on something technology related, and technology is like one thing that is a hot button for me. And it will just, I was talking to Patrick about this. I'm like, I don't necessarily know where that came from or why it's such a frustrating, overwhelming thing to me. But it is one thing that if I can't figure it out and things aren't lining up, I'm like, this should be so much easier. And my head will just like explode. So that being said, patience is one of the fruits of the Spirit.
But what's interesting, and to tag along with what you're saying, there's something there that indicates it's either a feeling of less than because you can't figure out technology things or whatever. And it's like sometimes those are the moments where we need some help, right? So it's like, technology is hard. I mean, it changes so fast. And like, I don't use Mac, you use Mac. I can't really help you a lot on that because I'm just not that familiar with Mac. I can get familiar, but there's invariably somebody out there who can come alongside and help you.
Right.
And so, when you're losing patience or whatever, that
Well, I'm not losing
I should
it.
say
It
lost
left today.
Lost patience.
It was gone.
Yep.
It is out the window.
Yep.
Yeah, it's gone. But we were thinking about the fruits of the spirit, and so let's do like maybe just like a quick introduction of that. We did mention it in last week's episode, but the idea is of today's episode, we're going to title it "Living the Fruit: Why the Fruits of the Spirit Are Important During Recovery." And you did a really good job of sort of introducing that, and also saying, this is a bi-directional thing. This is in terms of it being the addict partner and the recovering partner kind of working on these things, and they're going to be applicable to everyone. Again, this is like a humanity thing. It's like, how do we become good people? And every single person, no matter what our background is, no matter what our experience is, no matter what we are currently going through in our relationship, we have things that we struggle with, and there is a way to move forward. And the fruits of the Spirit is essentially like a list of kind of the character qualities and values and behavioral traits, I guess you could say, that we should all be working towards. And, a couple weeks ago, we talked about creating goals and setting value systems and looking at those lists and going like, where am I really good and where am I not so good? And the fruits of the Spirit is like a really good list of those things. So let me list them out really quickly just so we're all on the same page here. Do you want me to read a little bit? I'll back up a little bit.
I would read the two passages first, and then we can put it in context.
The whole thing that I talked.
No, the where it just talks about the fruit.
Galatians 5. It's in the chapter. Yeah, it's in chapter 5 of the book of Galatians in the Bible. It says, "But the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. There is no law against things like this." So again, just to put it in context, if you are faith-based and you have a Christian background, you may have a baseline understanding of what that means. If you're not, you might kind of be like, what the heck does fruits of the Spirit mean? So what we mean by that, these character qualities are things that the Holy Spirit, which we believe is one of the part of the Trinity of the God that we believe in, God the Father, God the Son, and God the Spirit, and his Spirit, the Holy Spirit, when you choose to believe in God and accept Jesus as his representative on earth and as your Savior, comes and he influences you while you live in the earth. He influences your heart. In a lot of ways, you could say that he works as your conscience, that he prompts you. But I think it's a little bit more than your conscience. I think because the Holy Spirit's goal significantly is to help you grow into this person that is more like God, that is more like Jesus. And that kind of a person is going to have these things, the fruits of the Spirit, this list that I just read. And if you think about it, it's like a really tough list.
Yeah.
But as you navigate the pain in life, to your point, we've talked about the phrase, I use the phrase, a trigger is just a reflection of an unhealed wound. So I don't know what my trigger is with technology, but it's definitely unhealed.
Yep.
But it's a great example of like, there's other things that people are triggered by, right? It could be a word or a phrase or a behavior or any of these things. And in relationship, it could be so many different things, like something that you associate with a pattern that you noticed in his previous behavior. And even though it has nothing to do with addict behavior now, if the pattern reminds you of something, that could kind of bring a trigger for you. So the triggers being a reflection of an unhealed wound is an important thing to know in the context of this conversation, because if we're going to work on being better people and learning how to embody these values, then in order to do that, we have to know where our weaknesses lie and
Right.
what still hurts us and activates us in a way that we would struggle with patients, for example.
Yeah, yeah. I guess to give credit where credit is due, really what got me going down this road of thinking about this was, and I mentioned it in the previous episode, was I was unkind to you on Christmas Eve. And it's just, just to boil it down, right? You can always talk about, well, this, I was afraid of this, blah, blah, blah. I was just unkind, and I was embarrassed by my behavior. And, we repaired very well. We really did. But it really started me on this journey of thinking, why did I behave that way? What was going on? And then Pure Desire had their end of year podcast, and Nick Stumbo, the director, in that he mentioned the fruits of the spirit. So it really kind of started to encapsulate, how that would come around. And I think sometimes when you're thinking about a particular situation, it may not mean that you're not angry or something in the situation, let's say your internal feeling, but your approach to it may be less reactive, less sarcastic, less, you know what I mean? All of those things. You're like, I'm feeling some anger right now. I need to seek some clarification. Hey, honey, can we sit down and can we talk through this really, really quick? Because I'm getting a little worked up about this situation, and then we can talk it through. Versus in my case, in this particular case, I flew out a flippant comment that was very hurtful and caused some issues, right?
So. And part of what was happening, because I'm going to bring up the idea here that when we want to be better people and we want to connect with our partner and work towards reconciliation after something really hurtful, where the betrayed partner might feel like they have the upper hand or the right to be angry, right? Mm-hmm. Let's say that, and that you do for a long time, right? Yeah. The behavior was hurtful. But when you're zooming out and you're looking at the big picture of reconciliation, and then both of you growing and becoming better people and reconnecting, and safety, again, we always want to clarify, like, this is, safety has been established, right? Like, right. So we're talking, it's not
day two.
Yeah, we're talking about that phase of your relationship where, like, safety has been established. You guys are working on, deeper levels of health, not just, stepping into, week one of discovery. But the idea that I wanted to throw out is that in order to be able to accomplish this and in order to connect with somebody, I think you have to understand that people think and feel and speak and communicate differently than you. Mm-hmm. So one of the things that happened in the conversation essentially was you were making some assumptions about what was in my head and how I was feeling or how things would go. And as we later talked things out, it was like, oh, well, we basically both wanted the same thing, and we kind of wanted to go about it in a different way. Mm-hmm. And I think if you, as a human being, have an expectation that everyone thinks exactly the way you think, everyone uses the words exactly the way you use them, or like if I thought that your filter in life was the exact same as mine, I would never, maybe as an example, I might never come to the understanding of why you have done the things that you've done and made the mistakes that you've made. But if I can understand that your brain literally thinks about things differently, you've had different life experiences, and even within the communication, right? That if you might say something to me, and the example of Christmas Eve, you and I didn't do a great job of this, right? Of where it's like one thing was said based on assumptions that was hurtful, and then it sort of shut everything down, and then accusations were made probably both ways at that point, right? And then it was like, okay, so then the trigger happened, right, and then emotions escalated, right? So to your point, instead of doing that, if we can always have the understanding, like if we can 99% of the time approach the other person as if they want the best for us and make that the baseline assumption, then we might be more likely to ask questions or say like, hey, what are you thinking? Or jump into explaining, this is exactly how I'm feeling right now, and communicate that instead. Because I think ultimately we did want the same thing. We just were going about it different ways. And I think sometimes in recovery that might, and I don't know if this is true or not, but I would assume that would be sort of a common thing, is that both people really want health, both people really want recovery. There's a lot of emotions, and
maybe the addict feels that they can't speak up in some way because of everything they've done, and so they kind of roll with it, and that can create a little bit of some tension, as opposed to the ability to honestly speak, come forward with some gentleness, and to use some terms, gentleness and self-control, and say, hey, is it okay if we talk through this right now, and stuff like that.
Yeah, so I think I'll give sort of like one example of like this in real life. I was watching a video the other day, and it was a newscaster. It was like a TV newscaster. I think it was over in Britain, and I was telling you this the other day. I'm not 100% sure what the exact context of the story that they were reporting on was, but it had something really, really horrific things had happened to what I think was like a significant group of women, right? Women or girls. And so you can imagine what that might be: physical, sexual, abusive kind of behaviors towards these people. Okay. And that's what the topic was sort of around. And the newscaster was just berating this other woman. I'm not sure, if she was another newscaster, if she was a guest, whatever it was. And she was just berating her because she asked this question, hey, did you read the documents? And again, I'm pulling the context that I could get out of a somewhat short video. But the documents would have explained in detail the abuses that these individuals experienced, right? So really graphic, really terrible things, right? So the newscaster's point was essentially, if you care as a human being, you would read this, and that demonstrates care, right? So, okay, so from her perspective, you have this idea that if you are a good person, because in her filter and her worldview, if you are a good person, you would read these, and that means that you care about them and want to do something about them. The woman that she was really yelling at started to get very upset because she said, I don't need to read them to know that what happened is a horrible thing, to care about these girls, to care about these women, and to want something to change and to be, intent on that. And she, I think somewhere in there, made a comment about the reason she didn't read the documents was because it was too much for her, right? And so this newscaster just kept skewering her, and then the people in the comments were just skewering her over this. And my point in sharing this is, when you understand trauma and you understand that people's brains work differently, and the way the world turns is that we're all good at different things and we all have different abilities, you can look at the woman that she was yelling at, again, whether it was a newscaster or a guest or whoever it was that didn't want to read those documents, and understand that from a completely different light. 99% of these comments and the newscaster publicly shaming her for not doing this, and I'm watching it from a different perspective, a different worldview, a different filter, with complete compassion and understanding for her, because I go, I get it. She might be one of those people that if you read something like that, you visualize it, and or if you read something like that, it's the same as almost physically experiencing it in her body, because people's brains work differently. So some people can watch a movie and not be upset by it at all. Other people can watch a movie and it feels like they just lived that. It's so scary. And so this woman might be one of those people where she cares so deeply about protecting those girls, but it doesn't mean that she has to experience what they experienced or read incredibly graphic, horrific details of something in order to care. And so I think that's a really good example of like understanding those are two people coming from the same perspective, right? They both care about those women, and they both care maybe equally, but they view it so differently. And so I think we have to understand, I think that's an important key in humanity, in relating to other human beings. And, in this episode talking about relating to your spouse, understanding that you guys can have the same exact goal and care about something just as much and view it totally differently. And I think that's where the fruits of the Spirit are going to help us. Conversation and communication, curiosity and compassion. But I think those things can happen if you accept the fact first that not everyone is going to think the same way as you, even if their goal is the same or they care the same. Does that make sense, the way I explained that?
Yeah. I was actually listening to a podcast this morning with Simon Sinek on it. And for those of you who don't know who Simon Sinek is, he's kind of a leadership relationship like expert. He's done a lot of consulting and speeches and teaches people how to do public speaking and things like that. And he was talking about how he has a friend who is from, I think, a rural part of West Virginia, but has a different political view than he does. And so much so that kind of believes in conspiracy theories and things like that. So you can, by the way, I'm articulating this, you can guess what Simon Sinek's worldview is. But he speaks about how he used to dismiss her and call those things crazy. And so he and her embarked on this process, I guess, where they don't dismiss and they don't label. They act with curiosity towards something that, if you could think about our own political sphere, would be, I can't believe you believe that. Mm-hmm. And so the statement is always met with curiosity.
Yeah.
And so he says it's really changed their relationship and made them much closer because of that process. And it allows him to get a window into what she's thinking, and her a window into what he's thinking, because they're not just summarily dismissing, well, that's crazy because I don't agree with it.
Exactly. I think that's a really good point, because we go, if we disagree with someone on outcome or the way to do something, it means that we don't have the same values. And that's not always necessarily true.
Right.
People have different life experiences. People have different skill sets. People have different influences in their life. And if you ever want to have influence over someone, curiosity and learning why they think the way they do is going to be more impactful than disregarding how they think about something anyway.
Yeah.
Right. Well, so even if you really, 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 really disagree and you want their thinking to change, like just attacking it isn't going to be helpful.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, I mean, they and I use this at work. The degree of influence is governed by the depth of the relationship. Mm-hmm. So, if you have a horrible relationship, you're going to have no influence. Mm-hmm. And so it's always governed by the depth of the relationship.
So getting back to the idea of the fruits of the Spirit, because even though we're not like breaking them down one by one, this is all sort of like tying in together. When I was looking at them, I was like, what if we talk about them like how like in sections? So meaning there are some that sort of apply a little bit more internally. So your internal ones, you're thinking, are like love, joy, and peace. Those are sort of like internal fruits of the Spirit, about like they govern you could think your nervous system, your sense of alignment, your sense of authenticity, your sense of groundedness, right? Then you have fruits of the Spirit that relate to how you interact with other human beings. And those would be patience, kindness, goodness, and gentleness. Now, these overlap, right? Like patience is definitely it's an internal work, but it also plays a lot into how you interact with other humans. And then how we behave, right? How we behave towards others, sort of like faithfulness, right? So that would be faithfulness.
Integrity.
Yeah, faithfulness could, I thought when I was thinking about it, though, it could kind of go like when you hear the word faithfulness, especially in a context like this podcast, you immediately go like fidelity. Right. But it could also mean steadfast and like consistency, right? When someone is faithful, they are committed to something and they continue to see that through, right? There's like a consistency and a steadiness to that. Yeah. So you can kind of think about it in that way too. And then, again, in the section of like how we behave is like self-control. So you have the internal love, peace, and joy. You have how we interact with others, patience, kindness, goodness, and gentleness. And then how we behave with faithfulness and self-control. And those apply, again, it's not just to the addict and the the betrayed partner. It's like every single human, right? If we looked at this list, we all have something to work on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was thinking, and I'm always very careful. I want to make sure that we never increase shame inadvertently. And I was thinking about this with the addict, the self-control piece. And so, sometimes addicts get triggered, or maybe they're having weird thoughts or whatever that they're afraid of. I always feel like self-control is the presence of a plan. So a plan, self-control is, you got triggered. You're a little afraid that you're going to go do something that you said you'd never do. But your plan is always, I'm going to make a phone call. I'm going to go read this thing. I'm going to go for a walk. You already have all that layered in. Mm-hmm. And so that indicates a level of self-control, as opposed to, I'm never going to have a trigger. That's not
right.
And why did I have a trigger? That means I don't have self-control. That's not exactly
when we say trigger too, I think let's define that just really briefly, because I think in this context, sometimes we go, oh, trigger to act out. And that's not necessarily true. It can just be an emotional activation. Mm-hmm. So trigger could also be swapped with the word stress, right? Like we're never going to go through life and not have a stressor.
Right.
So if that word kind of trips you up in any way, thinking like, oh, it's got to be a trigger to like, I'm triggered to act out right now. That's not always necessarily like, you can also just switch it with the word stress. Like we're going to be stressed in life.
Right.
We're going to have anxiety. We're going to have worry sometimes. We're going to feel angry sometimes. So self-control, right? Like today I was really getting a little upset at the technology. I was angry. But I had so much self-control. I didn't burn the house down.
Well, you didn't throw your laptop. So people do that, and
right.
like that.
Let's just break them down a little bit further than that. So when we're talking about love, the Bible also gives us a really good, when we're thinking about like, well, what do you mean by love? Okay, like as a fruit of the Spirit, the God is helping me become more like God, and God is love, and I want to be a being that loves others and loves God, right? And so in 1 Corinthians 13, it's the famous love chapter. It's read so many times at weddings. And it's like, okay, well, if I want to be someone that experiences and offers love, what does that mean? And so 1 Corinthians 13 defines it as love is patient, love is kind, it does not envy, it does not boast, it is not proud, it does not dishonor others, it is not self-seeking, it is not easily angered, it keeps no record of wrongs, love does not delight in evil, but rejoices with the truth. It always protects, always trusts, always hopes, always perseveres. Thinking about that in the context of recovery and the work that it takes couples to reconnect after trust is betrayed, that is such an important paragraph, I think, about when you are trying to rebuild trust. What you're trying to do is you're trying to demonstrate love in a way that it's believable. And if in that paragraph just gave so many things. And also on the betrayed side, when you are choosing reconciliation, offering love to your partner, it's this one's crazy to think of in terms of recovery for the betrayed partner, because it says it keeps no record of wrongs. Mm-hmm. Like that's like the purest form of love, right? Like, okay, we've dealt with this. We've rebuilt trust. Maybe the interpretation of that one in this context might be something like there comes a point where it's like, the idea of like, don't like hold it over your head, for example. Like how would you explain that? Like, not bringing it up every chance I get a little irritated, or a little frustrated, right? Like, well, you did this to me, and so therefore I have the right? Like that would kind of be an example of like keeping the record of wrongs. Mm-hmm. And sometimes, humans tend to do that when you get a little irritated. Sometimes in a conversation, it can be like, well, do you remember in 2007 when XYZ, or do you remember when, you hurt my feelings and you did this, or you said this, right? That would be keeping a record of wrongs. But love would be work, kind of to your point, what you were just talking about earlier, is, okay, we have this disagreement. We know that we're on each other's team. Mm-hmm. We love each other. We want to communicate better. We want to understand the other person's side. And then when it's resolved, it's resolved.
Right.
And you put it away, mm-hmm. and you keep going. Now, if the same pattern keeps recurring and the same thing keeps coming, that's different. But
Well, yeah,
if you're
it
truly
doesn't mean that you're there to be abused.
right, exactly. But if you're truly like resolving things and things are changing and things are growing, then you set that aside. And it's like, okay, I'm not going to bring up the thing that we've resolved over and over and over. That might be a good example. But I mean, if you think about the definition of love based on that chapter, that's a tough.
I believe there were some more fruits of the Spirit in that.
Oh yeah, it starts with love is patient, love is kind.
Right.
And there's patience and kindness in the fruits of the Spirit, so it overlaps tremendously. It's not proud, like you and I were. I don't know if this is necessarily. I'm going to throw it in there. Hopefully, it's applicable in a good way. But you and I was talking to you about in this. In this work, when you're in the recovery community, there are people that, if you're going to go into a recovery ministry, most likely it's because you have a heart to help people, right? And so, you end up seeing other people and other leaders and coaches and therapists and whatnot on social media who have these recovery platforms. And I was telling you the other day, I was noticing a couple people and the way that they were posting sort of bothered me. I think you have to be very careful when you are representing recovery and hopefully health and integrity, and you're trying to promote those things actively, that the way you post and the things that you share reflect that. Right. And there was an example of someone who was just being very clickbaity. And I don't like that. And they were using images that you and I were talking that if you were a porn recovery coach and you were posting those images and I was your wife, they weren't like quote unquote inappropriate necessarily, but they were kind of skirting the line of like, they were kind of on the edge of like, I would be questioning why you felt the need to use that image as opposed to something else.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Right.
So, so the reason I'm bringing that up is because when you're talking about, love and defining these characteristics, it says love is not proud, right? So pride kind of getting in the way of things, and that can show up in so many different ways. But, when I was talking to you about this, it's like, you can take pride in recovery. You can take pride, but sometimes, people might even take pride in their past sin. Sometimes you've noticed when, if you ever listen to somebody talk and the way that they're talking about their previous bad behaviors is in a way that almost sounds like they were proud of what they did, a little red flag should go up.
Yeah.
Right? It's like, does that make sense the way I'm explaining this?
Absolutely.
So those are just a couple of things that came in my mind. I was like, those are just, it makes you wonder, and you don't want to wonder about people that are promoting recovery. You want them to be healthy.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Well, I think the one of the truest notions, and to bring this back to the fruit, I think one of the truest notions is this is a destination, and what we're trying to do is we're trying to show up in an open, honest, and vulnerable way in the world. So if you think about, the fruits of the Spirit are about how you demonstrate, but it's also in how you receive too. And so, part of the act of recovery is you're changing, and you've talked about that. And so, like, I think what you were referring to when you're seeing pride is while there may be some significant change, there's still some things there. And I think that's what I led with at the beginning was when you get a chance to go, man, I was more angry than I thought I was. Boy, why did if I apply it back to this matrix of the fruits of the Spirit, man, something's happened. Something really bothered me. I've been given the good fortune to go and help some other plants improve. And I've been really, now that this is kind of on my mind, I'm like, when you're helping people improve in a professional setting, there's a lot of fear that comes in there. They may, inadvertently think they're in trouble, their job's on the line, whatever. And so how can I demonstrate improvement and sense of urgency while making sure that my approach reflects the fruits of the Spirit? So, because, invariably you want good people to grow, and that's always my objective when I go to improve things. I'm not trying to take over. I'm just trying to help people come along. But I did an improvement project last year, and I didn't necessarily think about it in this lens. This year I'm thinking about it with that lens as well. And so I don't know if it'll drastically be different the way I go about doing it, but it kind of ties back a little bit to being authentic too, and showing up in the world in the way that you want to. That's not, that's showing growth, which is really what the recovery process is for everybody. It's a period of growth, and it's massive growth, and it's growth that beyond what we ever expected to achieve. I mean, I think about this, it's like, gosh, I really did not want to be a sex addict. I really didn't want to be. And I look back on that and I'm like, but man, the amount of growth that I've gone through, that you've gone through over the last 4 years, the amount of growth that we've helped people through, I mean, that's amazing. And it's not because, I guess, I don't know, it's kind of hard. It's kind of hard to reconcile that, right?
It's not because you did something bad. It's because God took something that you wanted to turn away from that. And so God utilized that into something good.
Right. So it helps you approach people with compassion. And it's like, if you were running groups and you didn't demonstrate the fruits of the Spirit, I mean, those would be some bad groups. You know what I mean? They would just, nobody would get healed. People would be mad at each other. And so you really have to.
Well, one of them, right off, love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, right? And you think about, well, what's kindness? It's like the golden rule, right? It's like, are we doing our best in life to treat others the way we want to be treated? And I think that means with dignity and respect, right? And I want to put when I say respect in the context of a marriage, I immediately have like this bing of like, the evangelical hierarchy of like,
is it the book Love and Respect?
Just like you have to respect your husband, and that's not the
darn right.
It's that respect. It like there's a respect that you give humans because they are human,
right,
and they are valuable and worthy because they exist and they are created in God's image. Right. There's a baseline respect that every human gets, and then there's a respect within relationships that is earned because of behavior, because of dress and stuff like that. So I, whenever I think of that word, it's kind of like, okay, there's this little ding, like, but no, kindness is really treating others the way you want to be treated. And that's with the baseline of dignity and respect, right? You're a human that was created in the image of God. Therefore, you have value and you have worth, right? And we always want to think too. I think sometimes when we're wronged, it's such a natural tendency for our defense mechanisms to go up and to want to, I don't know, shoot daggers at the other person or make them feel hurt the way we are hurt. And I think that's a natural. It's like a normal reaction. It's like a defense mechanism, like the porcupine, right? Like they throw their quills or whatever it is that they do when they're scared. But I think that's the thing to recognize, is that comes from a place of fear. And we always want to think about, if we don't appreciate being treated a certain way, we want to be careful that we don't mimic that pattern back to the same person or to other people in our life.
Right.
Because now we feel justified in treating some that way because we're the one that's hurt. Yeah. Right. If somebody has hurt us, we don't want to return hurt with hurt.
Yeah. It's
as much as we can.
This can be a very complex conversation for some of you, depending on your phase of recovery. And so, you want to feel your emotions. You want to feel rage if you've been betrayed. You want to experience those. And so you never want to go, it's day 3. I just learned that my partner has been cheating on me for 10 years, but I'm going to react with patience and joy And I'm going to say, hey, what have you learned from that we can incorporate into our, you know?
Here's the thing. You hurt me. I didn't go out and have an affair.
Right.
Okay.
Right,
So
yeah.
reciprocating that. And then another way to think about kindness too is that maybe will sort of clarify to your point. Kindness from the betrayed partner in the first phases and months of discovery and everything coming out. Kindness is setting high expectations and
that's a great point.
And establishing very clear boundaries.
Yeah.
Kindness is giving the addict the structure to recover.
Yeah.
Giving them the tools and the processes and the boundaries that enables them to get healthy. That is kindness.
Right. And
even though it's hard.
And I've said that before. I think your boundaries and locking things down and what I mean, those kinds of things were instrumental in my healing, as uncomfortable as it was.
Mm-hmm. And we have goodness, which you could align with the concept of integrity. And I Googled, what is goodness? And Google says the quality of being morally good or virtuous. And I thought, with a lot of these things, this is you focus on yourself. These are all characters and virtues to focus on, like, are we accomplishing these things? Are we to the best of our ability? Are we growing in this? Is this an area that I struggle with, right? Like, which one of these kind of resonate with me and how can I get better? Faithfulness, we mentioned that earlier. So steadfast, consistency, fidelity, those sorts of thoughts. Gentleness. Now, here's the thing with gentleness that I think is going to be a tough one. And again, thinking about where you are in recovery, giving yourself grace for being a human, making sure that clear boundaries are established, being a strong, confident person who sets boundaries does not make you mean, and it does not make you unkind, and it does not make you not gentle. So I want to clarify that before I define gentleness here. Those are all important things. But gentleness, when I was thinking about gentleness, I was thinking about the verses in the Bible about how basically our tongue it can be like used for good or evil. Like, it has our tongue, our words, and the way we talk to people has so much power. You can build someone up with one compliment, and you can tear them down with a few words. Okay. And so there's a couple verses to that point. Proverbs 18:21 says, "The tongue has the power of life and death, and those who love it will eat its fruit." Life and death. We have to be careful what we're saying, right? We want to be careful what we're putting into somebody's life with our words. Proverbs 17:27 says, "The one who has knowledge uses words with restraint, and whoever has understanding is even-tempered." Now, again, like, it's okay to defend yourself. It's okay to set boundaries. It's okay to be angry, all of those things, right? I think this goes back into the concept of that we were talking about a little bit earlier, which is, when we were talking about love and then not holding things over someone's head after it's been resolved, after the behavior has changed, right? And so then that would be an example of, like, how our words could be used to really hurt someone is if if you had done all of this work for the past 4 years and your behavior had really changed, but I was really berating you as if I said mean things to you today, that about, like, I view you. If I viewed you today as the same person as you were then, that would be difficult.
Yeah.
And that would be painful.
Right.
And that would probably, hurt you verbally a lot, right?
Yeah.
And so that's just maybe like an example. Again, like, we're all going to yell, we're all going to get angry. When our boundaries are overstepped, it's okay to defend yourself. Right. But these are just different things, right? That at different phases of life are going to hit you differently. Where you are in your healing, where your spouse is in their healing, where you are in the reconciliation process together. All of these things are going to hit you differently. But the fruits of the Spirit are really just about, morality and ethics and trying to become a better person. And it's just like the most clear list ever, that if you ever want to be like, what do I have to work on today?
Yeah.
Oh boy, do I have a list of like 10 things, to check off, right? So Those are just some things to think about. And you mentioned self-control too, right? Obviously that's going to apply to the addict in recovery. And then recovery goes so much deeper than self-control. Recovery, that self-control would be applicable mostly in sobriety, like we were talking about the other week, the difference between the two. And then it's going to move much more into healing the wounds and releasing that. And I do want to kind of, when we're wrapping up this concept, you mentioned at the very beginning, the idea of these things isn't shame. And I think sometimes the way we read the Bible or the way we interpret things is really, really important, because God, like, he sets these standards because he loves us and he wants us to live a life of freedom and joy and happiness. And like, not happiness in the sense that like everything will always go perfect. He never promises that our life will be just this magical unicorn of rainbows and glitter ever. That's not what I mean by that. But he wants us to have this sense of peace, and he wants us to have this deep sense of joy, and he wants us to feel free. And these are the kinds of things that help us be good people that can live in authenticity, wake up, know we're people of integrity, and go to sleep at night going, I've made mistakes, but I'm doing the best I can. And every day I do the best that I can. And so he doesn't make these lists to like shame us or guilt us. And I think sometimes, like, I always think about like the verse, like, do not be anxious. If somebody reads that as a command, you do not be anxious. And if you are anxious, you're sinning, that they're going to interpret that with so much guilt. But you always have to understand, like, that's not the energy with which God gives these things to us. It is, what I want for you is to not have anxiety because I love you. I care for you. I'm here helping you. You don't need to be anxious. It doesn't serve you to be anxious, right? Yeah. And so I think when you're, same concept with the fruits of the Spirit, if you're looking at the fruits of the Spirit and you're feeling, waves of shame, that is not what we intend when we're sharing this. But it is an opportunity for all of us to have moments of self-reflection of, how do I become a better person? Yeah. And then asking for help, whether it's a coach or a therapist, or if it's, bringing in prayer, if it's asking the Holy Spirit to, do that work within us, like, help me become this person, help me to face these things that I'm afraid of, help me to have the strength to navigate this, or this is a really big struggle for me. Like, how do I work on this? Help me see things the way you see things. Because if we try to keep seeing things as humans, we're going to, inevitably we will keep struggling. But if we can become, if our filter can begin to change, if we can begin to use more empathy, if we can begin to use more compassion, we can grow towards these goals.
Yeah, I think, this is another, you could argue, list of tools that helps us as we become more daily aware. Yeah. And as we become more daily aware, we can evaluate our behaviors. We can say, where were my emotions? And becoming more daily aware is a huge step towards recovery and becoming, more regulated in life. So
yeah. So I think, if we go back to the concept of the title, living fruit, and why the fruits of the Spirit are important during recovery. I think if we had to sum it up in one sentence, because it helps you become a better person, internally you're going to feel more aligned and more self-confident as these improve. You're going to feel more grounded spiritually. The Holy Spirit is the one influencing you. You're going to feel more connected to God. And then externally, these things can only help improve your relationships. And if you're thinking about your marriage in the specific context of this episode, these are the kinds of things that, when bi-directionally shared between each other in a relationship, can only strengthen it. And I think that goes to the point in the verse where it says, against these things there is no law. That means you cannot go wrong practicing these things. We hope that this was helpful and encouraging. We can't wait to sit with you next week. Woohoo! If you're listening to this, it means you've made it through an entire episode. Part of recovery is spending time engaging in healing and self-growth activities. We are thankful that you chose our podcast to be one of those activities today. Make sure you reward yourself for that accomplishment. If you've enjoyed this episode or this podcast, we would love to hear from you. Please take just a few moments to leave a rating and review, letting us know your experience with Recover You. We not only love hearing how these episodes are helpful, but ratings and reviews help others just like you who are searching for recovery information and support find the podcast too. We can't wait to hear from you. See you next week.